This episode is sponsored by Transcend, a veteran-owned and operated performance optimization company that I introduced recently as a sponsor on this show. Well, since then, I have actually been using my products and I've had incredible success. There was initial blood work that was extremely detailed, and based on that, they offered supplementation. So I began taking DHEA, BPC 157 for inflammation, based on the fact that I've been a stuntman, a martial artist, and a firefighter my whole life. Lots of aches and pains. Dihexa to help cognition after multiple punches to the head and shift work, and peptides. 4 months later, they did a detailed blood work again, and I was actually able to taper off 2 of the peptides because my body had responded so well to just one of them that it was optimized at that point. So I cannot speak highly enough of the immense range of supplementation that they offer, whether it's male health, female health, peptides to boost your own testosterone, which I would argue is needed by a lot of the fire service, or whether it's exogenous testosterone needed, especially after TBIs or advanced age. Now, as I mentioned before, the other side of this company is an altruistic arm called the Transcend Foundation, which is putting veterans and first responders through some of their protocols free of charge. Now, Transcend are also offering you, the audience, 10% off their protocols. And you can find that on jamesgearing.com under the Products tab. And if you want to hear more about Transcend and their story, listen to episode 808 with the founder, Ernie Colling, or go to transcendcompany.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Assistant Chief of West Metro Fire Rescue and researcher Mike Binney. Now, as many of you would have heard me talk about, there is very little research when it comes to sleep deprivation and shift work in the fire service specifically. And Mike has made it his mission to be one of those voices within our profession. So we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the fire service, the chronic and acute impact of sleep deprivation, shift start times, why there is a lack of research in this area, studying the progressive 2472, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Mike Binney. Enjoy. Well, Mike, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
So I am in Littleton, Colorado, just south of Denver, on the southwest side of Denver. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Let's start at the very beginning of your story then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
So I was born in Portland, Oregon. We moved to the Denver metro area when I was 6 months old. We have been here ever since. My dad moved here for grad school from New Zealand. We've been a couple generations deep on the North Island of New Zealand. Everybody else on my dad's side still lives down in Tauranga and Auckland, and a couple people up in Wanaka, which is very cool. Someday get the family back down there. My mom on the other side of the world is from New Jersey, two very different places to be from. And so my mom was from a little town on the south end of the Jersey Shore called Cape May. And I grew up going there pretty much every summer. We'd go there and my red hair would get burned. And I'd spend a lot of time in the shade after about the first week. I've got a little brother, but he's bigger than me. He is a super smart data nerd and works in the defense sector doing computer stuff. And he just refers to people as the client. So that's about all we get to know about his job, but he's very smart and very cool. He's 4 years younger than me. So it was nice to beat up on him while I could. But now that's definitely not the case.
I absolutely love New Zealand. When I was traveling around the world, I spent, I think it was 2 weeks, started in Auckland and just worked our way south. And the change in topography and geography in those two small islands is mind blowing. Like we didn't go to the beach, but it was beach weather, and we were on North Island, and then we finished snowboarding in Queenstown. So absolutely stunning place to go.
Yeah, we would do Christmas down there every couple of years, and one of my earliest memories is sleeping in one of those like BMW conversion vans while everybody was out windsurfing in the Mount Maunganui area. And like I will always remember the smell, and like when you wake up, like your face sticking to like a fake plastic seat. I think that's one of the things I remember most about going there when I was little. But yeah, it's beautiful country, super cool people. And yeah, like I said, it would be fun to get my kids down there to check it all out once they can tolerate more than a 4-hour airplane ride. Yeah,
it's a bit of a hike, that's for sure. All right. Well, then when you were at the school age, what were you doing and playing as far as sports and exercise?
In where I grew up, it was pretty much all 3-season athletes. You don't really see that as much anymore. So we would do baseball in the spring. We'd always have something going on, in basketball in the fall, football. Played that all through middle school, and was really not good at it. I was just awful. It was like, all right, let's put this guy in a place where he's not going to do any good or any harm. So in high school, I played golf, pretty good at that. Ran cross country, did basketball until everybody else got way better than me. But always ran track and tried to stay active. And that was the high school world. It was funny. Our school was new, and we were the first group to go through from freshmen to seniors. So they immediately put us in the most competitive conference, which in the Denver metro area was 5A. And I remember, man, we were a bunch of guys who were 140 pounds out there playing football or basketball events against grown men. So we had, everybody lettered for everything, but you were really not good. So that was definitely one of the more humbling phases in my life when we were, playing some of the big teams.
Did you carry on playing sport and exercising after high school? Did that carry on after that exposure to sport?
Well, if you count club dodgeball in college, very much then, yes. We played twilight golf in college as well, and then all the organized kind of flag football and stuff that was associated with some of those more carefree times in life. So did that, and then afterwards, again, once I joined the fire department, it was all fitness and sports. And me and one of my buddies just kind of did an off the couch marathon in Las Vegas. And that was, again, another humbling event. I think I'm starting to see a trend in some of this stuff, but then I was kind of hooked. I've run Boston. I ran Berlin a couple years ago, and it was just great. It's so much fun. It's nice to do, destination races and things like that, because you can prioritize them in your life. And, it's just really cool to get to be part of a running community, but, and to kind of do those things. So yeah. Yep, still stayed very involved. Now pickleball is the hotness in the stations, so we do a lot of pickleball. Probably shouldn't say that.
No, I think it's great. I've literally seen pickleball as tennis for everyone else. And what I mean by that, if you're really good at tennis, it's a fun sport. But for everyone else, it's serve, okay, go get the ball. Serve, go get the ball. Serve, return, go get the ball.
And then it inevitably turns into home run derby, and then everybody goes home.
Exactly. So, but no, what I asked about that is a lot of people that didn't excel in a particular sport never got that burnout. And it's very apparent now, the more conversations I've had, physically and mentally, some of these kids that were really, really, squeezed as far as performance in their sport in school and college, a lot of time there were injuries and burnout, and then there was a big drop off. But whether it's a country where sport was kept as play or whether it was just crap kids like I was that never got to that high level, I think that you avoided that, and that therefore carried on to maintaining your love of sport.
Well, and I think also, like, if you're not very good at something, your only thing that you have is continued grit. And I think when you look at endurance sport, like, really all you have to do is not stop. You don't have to be great. You don't have to do anything. You just have to not give up. So I feel like that's maybe why I was better at those things than, than any of the high contact sports.
So what about career aspirations? As you're going through the high school age, was it already the fire service or was there something else?
No, I had no idea. I mean, I left for college here in the Denver metro area. It seems like, half the kids went up to Boulder. The other half went up to Fort Collins to CSU. Bless their hearts. They'll never be as cool as the kids who went to Boulder. And then the really smart kids went to the School of Mines, and then everybody ends up working for those guys. So it was, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it was kind of like the natural progression was you're going to go to college and then you'll figure it out on the fly there. So I went up to Boulder and did my undergrad there. I was so good at going to college and not going to school that I got to do my first year twice. I almost was not invited back. And then near the end, I kind of realized that I was going down the road of being on the Van Wilder plan. So I said, man, I got to get out of here. So I went into my advisor's office and said, what am I the closest to graduating? One of the things that I thought was so cool about college was getting to take classes that you would have otherwise never, even now as a grown-up, I wouldn't pay for some of those classes, but I got to take humanities classes and classics classes and, the different economics classes. Like I really dabbled and celebrated the entire liberal arts catalog. And I think, not only does that make you good at bar trivia, but I think it also makes you a more well-rounded kind of thinker and critical thinker once you hit the real world. So, I did that. I was one of the first, like kind of the OG groups to go through the new neuroscience program up in Boulder under Dr. Jerry Rudy before it was like even a real thing. It was kind of just a couple classes that you could take under the molecular bio or the psych umbrella. And that was, fascinating, talking about how neurodevelopment and plasticity and all these kind of early on theories. This was kind of the first time that those were made available to undergrads, so that was really cool. But yeah, that was kind of my original thing. And then even near the end of college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I mean, it was like 2007. So there was like just about going into the financial crisis. There were no, most of my friends who were graduating just kept going to school. They went back in, kept, kind of accumulating more student debt. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but there weren't a lot of other jobs out there. So my girlfriend at the time, now she's my wife for, I'm on the hot seat here. I think we're 13 years now. But we dated for a long time, bought a house first and all that. But her dad was an engineer at the Denver Fire Department. And like I said, I was getting close to the end of college and I was like, I have no idea what the hell I want to be when I grow up. So I did a ride along with them and I was hooked, man. That was so much fun driving through town in a fire truck. And it felt like kind of that going back to that team mentality. You had everybody talking crap to each other, having a great time, cooking in the kitchen. But we had that, I saw that camaraderie. And that was the first time that I had seen that since, high school sports or, again, club dodgeball, things like that. So I was like, man, this is a sweet job. I think I'd really like to do this. And that's kind of how it all started.
Going back to what you said about trying different classes, there's a story about Steve Jobs who went to college but didn't actually take a major. He just started taking some classes, and one of them was calligraphy. And then years later, Apple becomes the first manufacturer that creates fonts on a computer. So you never know how those are going to apply. I took a speech class. Never had any idea that one day I'd be doing a podcast. So, sometimes when you're interested in something, it is worth taking those classes.
Well, I think it's just such a great time in your life where you have a little bit of flexibility to explore and learn different things and try different stuff that if you were in a regimented cohort group or something like that, you wouldn't have those opportunities to kind of dabble. I completely agree with you.
So what was your on-ramp experience? Even though you had, you said it was an uncle that was in Denver. Is that what you said?
Now father-in-law.
Okay, that's right. I'm sorry. Excuse
Yeah.
me.
Yep. Yeah.
So you didn't have that obviously exposure growing up then. So what was your kind of front door on-ramp experience as far as entering the profession?
Well, I just Googled it and ended up taking kind of a consortium test at the same time as applying specifically to West Metro. In the Denver metro area, we had a consortium test. Denver had its own test, and then a bunch of departments went through and had one big process together. And then West Metro itself had its own process. So I went to EMT school and drove that first summer after college, and drove a wheelchair car and just crushed it. Drove it all over town, listening to music with the windows down, driving old people to their different appointments. That was kind of, you go into EMT school and you're like, all right, I'm going to do something super cool. And then you're like, and wheelchair van. So I did that for a while I was testing, which is great because it gave me time to, think about things, read books, understand, look things up on the original browser on the Motorola Razr, trying to look at, how to do that stuff. So that was kind of the first round of becoming enthusiastic. And it's so hard, when you're trying to get on. That's something that I keep reminding myself of, like, once you're blessed with the opportunity to do this job, I think it's incumbent upon you to try and help others achieve their goals. And I just remember, some of the people that helped me during the testing process, specifically, like Ben Schultz, who works down in Palm Beach City now, and Brian Brush, who's, this world famous guy. Like, they were both guys who took time out of their lives to help me articulate my thoughts and get ready kind of for the oral board process. So was lucky enough to get hired with West Metro on the first round that I tried with them. And then it was kind of pedal to the metal after that.
What was the environment like as far as competition to get hired in that period that you were coming in?
Well, and this is kind of like my overall thought about, kind of the cyclical nature of the public sector hiring, and specifically like our jobs. Like, it was going into the financial crisis. We had, I think, over like 1,000 people applied, and our academy had 13. We ended with 12. So it really was, it was highly competitive. And I remember, during the physical ability test, ours wasn't like CPAT where it was just pass fail. It was balls out, and there were people puking at the end, like they had an ambulance stage there. It was, if you were going to get 100 points on that test as part of your your overall score, you were putting the work in, and you were going to need some time laying in the parking lot before you felt safe to drive home. So yeah, it was very competitive. Every step you're like, oh, I just want to get that email. And even, I always remember, this is a funny one, is I remember on the written test, we took it in a big high school, and they had multiple waves of people taking the test. You go in and you sit at, these round lunch tables from the high school, and you get your Scantron, and then you go stand in line with everybody, and they have like the Scantron of shame, and people are putting it in, and it's going, and they don't get the, the golden ticket to the next round. And you're like, oh, please just let the Scantron be quiet. But those are things, so many places do like online testing now. You don't get the joy of, the peaks and valleys of going through it as a process, as a group of people, and the Scantron. I don't think anybody ever forgets that Scantron noise.
I did the written test for Anaheim, and this was the actual written one. It was in the Anaheim Convention Center, and there were 1,000 of us sitting at a desk. And I can't remember if it was in waves or not, but and obviously I just know the time that I showed up. But yeah, I mean, just a sea of recruits. And I've said this many times, this is at the written. So they've already been vetted. They filter out all the ones they didn't want. And then, as I found out later, a lot of these guys were already certified. Well, they had to be certified fire, EMT and or medic, but they were, green jeans, like CDF. They were ambulance operators. They were explorers. I was a lateral, even though I only had a year on prior. So there was just a huge amount of experience. So it wasn't just 18 and a heartbeat. You're talking about people that have spent years padding their resume to even get that golden ticket, to sit at a written, to even try and get a job.
Yeah, it's I think about the guys that I went through academy with, and I'm like, man, these are some of the best humans I could have ever been associated with. And, that's definitely a point of pride for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's just an important point when you hear people, and we're really talking 10, 15, 20 years, so not that long ago, for people to understand how the fire service was. Because as we start getting into what we're going to talk about later, one of the questions is, well, we can't even hire enough people now. And my thing is like, yeah, but we used to. Very,
Hmm.
very recently, thousands of people would line up for a handful of spots. So A, how the hell do we get here? And then B, what do we got to do to turn it around so that we are choosing the top 5, 10% of every list, not 85%?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So you kind of got through the front doors now. Talk to me about probation, and then what was some of the units that you were assigned to as far as trucks, engines, etc.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a good or a bad thing, but right out of academy, I got put on as the fourth on our heavy rescue, and it was, oh my god, it was overwhelming. There are so many acronyms, so many new things. The lieutenant at the time, he pulled me aside and said, "Your real job is to just know where everything is and hand it to somebody who knows what to do with it, and you'll get caught up along the way." And so, it was kind of the tail end of like all the fun firehouse pranks, I guess mostly at my expense, but it was, building some of that camaraderie. I remember, the idea of people messing with you is almost worse than what actually happens. One of the stations had the doors were all cut on the bottom about an inch higher than they, normally would be. So you could throw a cookie sheet of firecrackers under the under the door in the middle of the night. Or I remember, they were in my head so bad. Like one night I just slept in the recliner with my back against the wall because I was sure, somebody was going to do something. But I learned through a lot of feedback how to make the perfect scrambled egg. There are all these things that you pick up along the way, and so I was on that heavy rescue and learned a ton from arguably the more senior and experienced people that took the time to make me feel welcome, make me feel part of the team. Remind me of where I was in the pecking order, which was so, important, really important when you talk about, managing large scenes and things like that. And then I left there and I went to our busiest ambulance. So we do a rotation where you do either a truck or the rescue. You do the ambulance or the engine, and then you rotate around the district. So you kind of get to see everything. You're getting more broad experience once you're out of academy. So I went to our busiest ambulance, Medic 1, which, everybody seems to be reinvigorated by South Park right now. Our Medic 1 or our Station 1 is right across the street from Casa Bonita. So from the episode where Cartman has his birthday party at Casa Bonita. So it's our most socio and economically diverse part of our entire district. So you are running and gunning. You're running. I know at one point we had, over a 4896. We'd be in the mid 40s on calls sometimes. It was brutal. And I hate to say it was a rite of passage, but it gave me the perspective now that I'm in a position where I can kind of step back from being in the meat grinder and think about, man, like, that's not great. Driving home and not remembering driving home was not awesome. Living on nothing but Monster Energy drinks and Uncrustables, not great. But, when you're in 20, you don't know any better. You're just excited to be doing it. You want to run calls. You want to see awesome stuff. You want to break things and, generally be awesome. But I think you have a shelf life for that. And it depends on, in my mind, how long you squeeze that, is reflective and incumbent upon the district or the department to say, man, we got to make sure we're doing right by these people. So I did that and was there as a teaching paramedic for a while, and that was great. Got to see a lot of really cool people come through. Our district is partners with our local community college. So it's the Arapahoe Community College Paramedic School is kind of a magnet school. So we have people come from all over the country. So we've had people who would ride from Anchorage Fire, would come down and go to paramedic school in the Denver metro area, and then they'd ride on our busy ambulances as third riders. We'd have people come down from the mountains like Steamboat. And then, like I said, pretty much around the country come to this paramedic school and ride with us. So it was cool because we got to show our model to a lot of different people. We got to learn a bunch. We had the medical contract for the Red Rocks Amphitheater. So we'd do medical up there, and man, we'd get to see some of the coolest concerts and work medical for those. So we'd bring our third riders up there, and I just remember we were at a Sound Tribe Sector 9 and Deadmau5 concert up there, the full EDM experience. And he was this guy from Anchorage, and he was like, "What is going on here?" So it was just a great place to be new at this job. I learned a lot, and like I said, I think it's definitely given me the perspective of why we do what we do.
I can imagine that a DJ's head must have looked strange to a guy from Anchorage, Alaska.
Giant mouse head, yeah. And I remember we worked, the Marilyn Manson concert, and we're doing IVs on some of the people from they'd come to the first aid room, and they'd be like, even just at a mile high is a lot when you're probably singing and dancing like a lot of those people do. But it just gave us a different perspective on how medicine works. And it was, we have a little first aid room up there, but for the most part, it's you and your partner and the security people trying to help where you can. And you're, battling 10,000 of the drunkest, highest people on the face of the earth, with your little head flashlight and, pocket full of gloves. So I think it gives you, a different perspective of medicine and, how to balance what we needed to do in that task, and also trying to be a human and make sure people were being taken care of and safe and well cared for, and figure out what to do with them.
The altitude is no joke. I've never had altitude sickness or struggled until I went to Denver and I skied. I can't remember now. Matt Chan told me about it, but it was one of your smaller resorts. And firstly, we land in Colorado, and the guy in the car hire place is like, "We've got this freeze coming. You probably need to upgrade to a 4x4." And it was like at least double what we were going to pay, even more. And then I was like, "Oh, I've heard this before." So we have a 2-wheel drive car, and I'm driving up the mountains, and that's when you guys a few years ago had the coldest winter that you've had in whatever it is, because we arrived. And the most terrifying drives I've ever done in my entire life in a 2-wheel drive car down a Colorado mountain. But I did snowboarding, and I did kind of like a lesson, like intermediate lesson with a pseudo teacher / guide. But me and the other guy that were in the class, we were smoked. I think he was from North Carolina, and it was crazy. You don't realize at that type of altitude, because I've skied in Austria many times, and I don't remember getting tired when I was young, but yeah, I can only imagine adding that layer that most of us just aren't exposed to the EMS world must be challenging.
Well, and most of the people who are coming to concerts up at that altitude are not experienced drinkers or imbibers at that altitude as well. So I think people, to carry the metaphor, get a bit out far or get ahead of their skis over the tips a little bit when they get up there. So no, but it's great. But you never want to be the ding dong on the side of I-70 in a Honda Civic in a snowstorm, because
that would have been me.
Yeah, not a great place to be.
No. Luckily, it was so congested. The traffic was moving slow enough that it was barely able to. I was white knuckling it, and it was like what should have been a 90-minute drive was like 4.5 hours. So
oh yeah.
Anyway, it's funny because you made the comment about, being in the meat grinder or Medic 1, early in your career. And I think this is one of the things that's really created some of the issues is when you are young, you can handle some of these insane shifts. But if we take a step back, when we're young, we can also go out drinking, get home at 4 a.m, and then be up at 7 to go to a job. Doesn't mean that that's what you're supposed to do. So I think this is one of the kind of distorted lenses, is that some of our younger people, they are able to power through it, but at what cost down the road? Exactly.
Yeah.
So what about career calls then? What were some of the things you progressed through that first decade or so that you remember, good, bad, moments of compassion, whatever the ones that really stuck with you?
Oof. I think the opportunities to see people who had grown up in different circumstances than myself. When we got to see a lot of people who the system had failed. And I think about, one individual in particular who got blasted on his bike, and, his bike was his only mode of transportation. It was the only way he could get to his job, move about town, get around. And this guy's basically whole life was attached to his wheels. And he ended up being fine. But we took that opportunity to, put all our money together, not all our money, but go up to the Walmart and get him a new set of wheels, and to see kind of the thanks in that person's eye, not because it was good for us to do it, but it meant the world to him, because I think he had seen the system fail him so many times that somebody taking the time to go out of their way to help this person regain their mobility and their transportation. Man, I take it for granted. I have a, old pickup truck with car seats in it, and it turns on every time I need it to. And I load up my family and I take them around the suburbs to everywhere they need to go. And I've been very blessed with that. And this job has given me that. But there are people in this world who don't have those same opportunities. And while it was frustrating at times, while I was so tired at times, while I was wanting to say all the mean things in the world, for the 20th time we've seen this drunk guy on a call, the opportunity to have that perspective and have that, that moment of reflection was super important for me as I grew up in this career. One interesting thing that I think kind of put my generation of younger people who got hired in the late 2000s apart from some of the others, or the more recent people we've hired, is that we had like feet in two different generations, right? Like we had the older guys who would do unlicensed electrical work and roofing on their days off. And, they on their days off would, 2 packs a day or whatever. And then, we were the youngest, myself and one other guy who got hired in the academy right after me. We were the youngest people that worked at our fire department for like 6 or 7 years. We were the only people who were still in our 20s. So that gave us, I think, a different perspective, because we grew up in some of the older ways, but we were definitely younger in the sense of when we started hiring more people that were our age, they were people who had completely different life experiences than us. I spent my early 20s driving around on Colfax in an ambulance, and there were other people who had different jobs. And then we have, in since time, kind of coalesced into a single profession with two different upbringings. I have no idea if I said that correctly or if it made sense, but that's something that, I think about when in my role as a battalion chief. Like, I'm the youngest battalion chief that we have, and I have people who are the same age as me, who are new firefighters, and that's just a different perspective, and definitely something kind of worth unpacking down the road as we all grow together.
It's interesting when I reflect back, that older generation were the ones that I learned to retain the kindness, compassion, community that had brought me into uniform in the first place. And so whether it was, an entire station rotating to renovate a firefighter's house that was hit during a traffic accident, he was working and got nailed by a car. Hialeah, I saw that. Anaheim, I saw that. Anaheim, they would put money together, buy a bunch of toys, and we would go to some of the, the places we've been on calls where we noticed that there was definitely, family that was struggling with money. And then, you progress forward now, and I'm not just picking on the fire service, look at just the kind of overall conversation that we get from, whether it's politics or whatever it is. And you're hearing conversations of like, oh, this bum, Narcan's wasted on these addicts, et cetera, et cetera. Through your perspective, where has that shift happened that we've got away in some areas? Because there are some people that are have held on tightly to this, but we as a culture seem to have got away from the very kindness, compassion, empathy that is the root of this job. And some of them are just, I call them out all the time. You bought yourself a leather helmet, you grew a mustache, and you're all about fire and fuck EMS and rah, 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 and you're a fucking idiot. And then you've got the kind of compassion fatigue type too, that are just the burnt out medic firefighter. How have we lost that? And how do we go back to the very core of the fire service, of EMS, which is to help people, pure and simple?
Well, I think not doing it 40 times, 40 times a set probably helps too. I think from a fatigue management or a load management perspective, now that I'm like a grown up, I'm like, oh man, they call that, they have risk mitigation strategies and, fatigue management systems and all these fancy things. I think it's, a couple different angles on it. I think we need to not, I think from the story of Sisyphus, we need to not push the rock up the hill so many times, because I think that can lead to burnout. And then that starts you off on the wrong path when you're needing to do it as often as we're doing it. I also think, I think about like social media and how easy it is to say something mean, how it's easy to just chip at somebody. Whereas before you had to, look them in the eye or write them a letter when you were mad at them. And now you don't get to do that. You can say 30 mean things in a minute, whereas it was more difficult to be mean in the past. So I do think, it is, I think there are a lot of reasons for it. I don't think we are as humans inherently wanting to be that way, but I think the societal pressure of, paying, the exorbitant amount of money for housing in any kind of metropolitan area, there adds these other micro stresses that eventually pile up into one big deal that, make it difficult to be kind in the world in which we live. I mean, from the top level of what we're doing here in this human experience, we've got people who have made a lot of money and gained a lot of power saying mean things to other people. So I think when you have kind of those role models, it makes it easy to give yourself the excuse to not be kind.
Yeah.
And that bums me out.
What would be really good if people created a religion where the prophet was like a really kind person? Maybe that would
just
help.
Be cool, man. Yeah.
It could guide us to not be a dick.
Yes.
But anyway.
There's got to be something out there. Maybe a book or two about it. I don't know.
All right. Well, then let's kind of circle back. So you have this basis in neuroscience. You're progressing now through the fire service. You've definitely been exposed to these, high op tempo stations and rigs. When did you start seeing the workload, the work week issues as far as detrimental in your own personal career? And then how did that send you to the research side?
Yeah. Shoot. Well, I think it's like kind of the frog in the pot situation. You don't really know it until either your system or the promotional process or, some sort of operational thing takes you out of that pot. And for me, I took the lieutenant's test in like 2016 or something. And like I left Station 1 and I went into our EMS training division, which was a new position at the time. And looking back on it, I was like, holy crap, man, I was burned out and I never realized it because it was this, I always reference the rapper Tech-9 and I said, his album Misery Loves Company was literally what it was like living up there. You're listening to music at 11, you're driving around with the windows down and all night, just having fun, being awesome. Like I said, breaking stuff, going on all the cool calls. And then once you're out of it, you're like, wow, that was a great time in my life that I never want to have to do again. and so you move and you change situations. I was in a role where I was able to sleep at night. I was able to really focus my creativity and my energy on trying to build a EMS learning platform and making sure, at that time we were rolling out a whole bunch of new stuff. And I felt like reinvigorated intellectually in that spot, and having the bandwidth to do that allowed me to kind of flourish in that spot. And, we need people who are wanting to run calls, wanting to be busy, wanting to do all the cool stuff, but we also need the people who have that distance to help people in those roles maybe realize a little bit earlier in their careers when it's time to, hit pause for a second, rotate out, find something else that's stimulating. And I think that's, I always say again about our profession, you can have one career, but have 20 different jobs inside of it. whether it be any different role you can have. You can go to the bureau, you can go to risk reduction, you can go to investigations, or you can go to the FI route. You can get into training. You have all these different things that you can do without ever having to leave the seniority or the accumulated leaves or the salary that we get, and find that joy again, just doing something different, still on the same team.
So
I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry.
No, you did. But let me dovetail again. So you're out now. You're enjoying this. As you said, this kind of 9 to 5 work week. Now you're realizing that obviously there's a difference between not sleeping for 48 hours and what you're working now. How did that then kind of make you start taking a step back and looking at the way your department was being worked, whether it was the actual number of calls, the hours that you worked, and then what made you kind of want to start kind of finding solutions to that issue?
Yeah, I think, once I was in those roles, I moved from our training division into our safety and medical officer. And then from there to one of our truck and hazmat houses. And I saw that the camaraderie could still exist without just having to be busy for busyness' sake. And that was, finding that joy of I'm not going to say joy of going back to hazmat school, because that would be a lie. But, the camaraderie of being in a dual company house, having 7 people in the station, it was at the beginning of COVID, and then that was a completely different world. But having that small group of people that we kind of circled up on and found passion about our job. And I worked with one of my best friends, who's just an amazing fire officer, seeing his passion for what we did. And by being at a station where you could focus on the craft, focus on our job, focus on getting better every set instead of just surviving every set, was amazing. It was great. And to be around people who loved what they did, they were super passionate about it. That made me better at my job as a relatively new lieutenant. So, to answer your question, being on the day's assignment was great for a lot of reasons, but there's just nothing as cool as riding around on a fire truck. So to find a way to make that system great and tolerable from a workload management perspective became like kind of my passion, understanding the physiology behind what we do for 2 days at a time and the skills that we need, and in my opinion, we lack to recover on those days off, then became kind of, in truth, kind of the mission of what I found my next job in the fire department would be, was doing that. So, yeah.
So how did that kind of unfold then? So you had this kind of aha moment, what was the first area that you started looking into, and what was some of the issues that identified that were, preventable, that were changeable?
Oof. That's a tough question, because again, like so many of these things just happen incrementally over a career. So many different, this isn't like we always seem to say, oh, well, we wait for some tragic event to happen before we do anything. And, we have had, some issues at our fire department with people who had sleep issues and things like that. But I don't know that I'm informed enough to make a call on, this is what caused that. We've obviously had quite a few job-related cancers, and unfortunately, we've had a couple people pass away because of job-related cancers. But we see all these things, and it's like I didn't really realize how much I wanted to make a difference in this stuff, or even just understand this stuff, until I had kids. Like that was the biggest change in my life, because before you have kids, you can be busy at work, come home, and turn on Netflix and not move for 4 days. You know what I mean? Like there is no one who needs anything from you. And then as soon as you have kids, it's a whole new world. And you're working to just get through the day with little kids. And you're just like, you go from being sleep deprived at work to being sleep deprived at home. There's no reprieve. And then I'm like, wow, in this season of my life, I am very tired. And so I think that's, when my first daughter was born in 2018, like that's when it was like, man, I am beat and we should do something about it, or at least understand it better. So yeah, that, I don't know if that's a segue to talking about kids, but that's like kind of my reason is that I want to be a present and good dad when I can be home.
It's a great segue. I know we were hitting this before we hit record, but this is what I've said. I was in for 14 years and then another 7 after I, stopped getting paid to help the fire service. But all that time, the negotiations were always $1 raise, 50-cent raise, whatever it was. And I realized that we've been chasing the wrong currency for so long. The currency that is actually valuable to us is time with our family, full stop. And as we've, regressed this last 10 years, that has been stolen from us more and more and more, whether it's just, not advancing the work week, which we'll get to, or the recruitment crisis creating mandatory or volunteer overtime, because that's a skewed perspective as well. A lot of us sign up for overtime because we don't want our friend to get hit. So it's, it's still technically, mandatory overtime. So you have children. How did that change the way you viewed the number of hours that you weren't present at home?
It was hard. And it's, I think my wife, bless her heart, she has to run the show while I'm gone. And it is not an easy or graceful show. I don't know how many times we've had to FaceTime with somebody with an ear infection and we're trying to juggle sick time. And, it is brutal. Having kids is the hardest, but also the most rewarding thing I've ever done with my life. To see what they do, the crap that they come up with, the things that they know. I mean, we're real heavy into Wildcrats right now. I don't know if you guys have enjoyed the Wildcrats on PBS Kids app, but my daughter, the one who starts first grade tomorrow, the stuff that she comes up with, I'm like, where the hell did you learn these facts, man? And she's like so dialed in. And like, it's hard to miss some of those moments. And when we were talking before, I mentioned it, like I missed while I was at work, the first time Reese ever lost a tooth when I wasn't home happened while I was at work. And I was like, oh my gosh, this just doesn't seem, it's not fair to have to, put that thing back in your mouth till I get home. So you miss things like that. And you wonder, how the system can be kinder to people and young parents. And, so those are the things that you miss. And, for a while, we'll be able to say that Santa comes on the 23rd because kids are dumb and they don't know what day of the week it is anyway. But, that only works for so long. And so I think, we're very lucky that we can trade shifts and, use vacation where you can, or self-care leave, or the different leaves that you've banked to try and target, important dates, but it's hard. And being gone as long as we are, like I was saying before, like I went from when I was on a day's assignment, I went from being like a co-parent to now I show up and I'm like, oh, we've got new rules in the last 2 days. Turns out we're doing this now. And so, it's hard because I'm also, the assistant regional manager of parenting 4 days a week. And then I leave and then, I'm missing a lot of the important things. So that's, a trade-off of what we do. I think there's still, the good outweighs the bad, but the question is, could we do better?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember the tooth fairy myth was debunked after I missed one morning. Yeah. And then the number of times my son woke up and the elf on the shelf was still in the same place. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Let me have a word with him. And then while he goes to take a shower, I'm freaking, moving the elf around.
Go.
So, but it is a real thing, it really is. So, firstly, how long have you guys been on a 4896?
We went in 2006. So a couple years before I got hired. They were on the old 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off, 4 off. Prior to me, but we've been doing it for a while.
Okay. So what was some of the first solutions that you started looking to, or the research as far as collecting data as to this? Because I mean, as we hit, before we hit record again, and I've said this many, many times, there is a fine line between needing studies and just fucking common sense. And, 56, 80 hours a week for the people that you ask to mitigate your very worst day in your entire life, when everyone else works 40, it's common sense. But we also work for an industry I would argue sometimes to put a barrier up that say, oh, but I need to see the data. So kind of when did those lines kind of start to intersect?
Well, it was kind of, so I had gotten into another grad program and we needed to come with an idea. We needed to come with a project. And this started out just kind of on a Chipotle napkin of like one of the Chief Azeltine, his daughter is a very competitive bike racer. And so they had started to use biometrics when they were doing their load management work, when they were doing their training. And he and I had kind of talked about the idea of like, oh, wouldn't this be cool to actually create from a public health lens kind of this larger group study to understand the shift experience, not just while you were at work, but in totality of when you were, your entire experience. Because, like we've talked about before, like there are people with other jobs, there are people with other passions. There are guys who are going to go out and do the, Baja 1000 on their day off and, rev it up pretty good to the point that, they're not recovered to come back to work. So we had all these ideas, and we were lucky we were in a really good grant window for funding. We reached out to the Colorado eHealth Innovation Fund and kind of talked about our project. We're like, oh, this would be really cool. We have all these existing data systems. We don't really know how they all interact. And so we reached out to them, and then the Colorado Department of Fire Prevention and Control also had a safety and wellness grant that we were kind of able to squish together and get the cash necessary to kind of put this thing to create the academic backbone that would be needed to justify the project itself. So that's kind of in infancy. We looked at these strategies that high performance cycling teams were using and saying, we ask a lot of the same things of our people. We should be looking at this. We should understand physiologically what people are going through doing this job. Like I said, it started on Chipotle napkin, and now here we are a couple of years later, and we know more than we wanted to know.
So let's start unpacking that. What was the initial hypothesis, and then what were the magnitude of the data that you started collecting?
Yeah, so maybe how about let's roll back and let me talk about kind of the educational runway that got us to where we were. So I had done a graduate degree at the University of Colorado in public administration for public policy and hazard and disaster management. Super cool. Learned a lot about policy framework, intergovernmental work, and networked a lot in the Denver metro area. Met a lot of really cool people who seemed to have connections at this, that, or the other place. From there, I wanted to understand kind of what we were doing, again, at a public health perspective. So I applied to I have no idea how it happened, but I was accepted into the Yale School of Public Health's informatics track. So it was very nerdy, lots of computer stuff. I had to teach myself a lot of this coding stuff along the way. But like I said, we needed to come with a project. And from the get-go, my sell to the district was that I wanted to create a health and wellness project for the fire service. And I wanted to use kind of the academic horsepower of the Yale system to kind of get that done. And it went far and beyond whatever I thought it could have been when I first came up with this dumb idea. So year 2 of the program was the capstone program, and I had already had all the grant funding stuff figured out ahead of time because I knew I was coming with this project. Had already done a fair bit of work, talked to Sarah and Joel, and they were kind of my mentors during the whole spool up phase. But then also to talk to eHealth Innovation, at the end of the day, like trying to get this stuff rolling, it takes a whole bunch of different partnerships. And that's probably what I've learned most is like the partnerships and the coming to people with different ideas and collaborating across specialties. Like that's really how these projects get off the ground. So we were able to secure funding. We looked at a bunch of different types of biometrics. One of the things that I wanted to do as we were going through the process and the independent review board process, as when they were looking at and evaluating our protocol, we needed to have a way to disassociate the user from the data. So they didn't use the data to inform their decision-making process during the measurement window. But you couldn't do that unless you had the right biometric that would allow you to blind people and then also turn it into a wellness device on the other end. So we looked at a bunch, we talked to a bunch of people. We ended up we went with Whoop for that reason. Whoop's, they've been fantastic to work with. They let us blind people. So for the first 38 days of the project, everyone was blinded. So they couldn't use the app to inform their decision making. So they were blinded, the Whoops calibrated to their baseline. And then, we measured everything we needed to, and then we just let it rip. So part of it was also finding a tool that could also be used as a wellness device along the way. And that was good because, there's a lot, the measurements that we were taking, because I think the PPGs and the different sensors that they have are usually, somewhere between 60 and 70% accurate at actually understanding what actual sleep cycle you were in. Like it's a 60 or 70% accurate. But when you zoom out and you look at creating a biometric program at a population level, you're able to make these kind of population inferences that wouldn't be as easy at the individual level. Sorry, that got way in the weeds.
No, it's good. No, it's funny. Yeah, Professor Russell Foster was saying that. He's like, these wearables absolutely have application, and obviously everything from sheer movement to HRV. There's some great metrics in there. But he was saying even an EEG is kind of like junk science, and that's when you got electrodes stuck to your head. So a watch or a ring saying that they told you that you were in deep sleep for this amount of time, they're like, nah, that's not the case. But like you said, if you can look at the other metrics on a broader scale and not zoom into that, which is one of the downside of wearables, is guys freak out because their watch told them they didn't sleep properly. Then I can see, like, from a larger scale how that data would be able to help a lot.
Well, and I also think, like, when you think about actual sleep versus sleep opportunity, then you can start looking at, sleep consistency information. Do you have systems that are in place that are hindering the opportunity for sleep? And that goes into like this whole larger fire department ecosystem of what are you doing to not run lift assists? What are you doing to proactively reach out to nursing homes? What are you doing to stop the calls before they even happen? What is your community risk reduction strategy? Because the call that never happens allows people to have more consistent sleep. So there's all these different interdisciplinary things that we can do, specifically to the biometrics. I also think we need to look at trends over time. When you have an intervention, can you measure a pre and post? And then are you able to demonstrate value? Can you create not just correlation, but actual draw a causation line to what you're doing? And luckily, when you require somebody to show up to work for 2 days a week and then go home for 4 days a week, you have a very static system that you can look at and actually see what you do, the impact that it has.
So what was the difference between the data of the tactical athletes in the fire department and, say, for example, the data of the cycling athlete that was also being monitored?
I have no idea, honestly. Like the cycling team, they just used it as their platform for decision making on when they were going to do hard workouts and spool up and things like that. And I think they also use it a lot for tapering, to make sure that you're primed when it's game time. For us, I think we were trying to look for it from a perspective of having a built-in fitness tracker, something with wellness information already built into it, a way to monitor and aggregate the data remotely at scale, and then also use this as a validated data set for down the road. If we change anything, like how do we compare it to our pre and post so that we can demonstrate value? And ultimately, how can we educate our people in the broader fire service of what we learned? These our little one-off study, like, it's cool, but it's even cooler to see people take our framework and scale it, at the national level, which has been really awesome.
Were you able to compare and contrast, though, to a population that was athletic and slept every night?
Kind of. So when we were doing our pilot study, so when we were deciding whether or not it would be ethically responsible to or financially prudent to scale our study, we did a pilot with 12 people. So we compared half of our people were administrative employees who were on the 40-hour week, and then half of them were people who were in the firehouses. And that doesn't, equally, they're not the same people because our average age of people who were in administrative roles were older. So it's not really an apples to apples, but when we looked at it, every domain we measured from a sleep perspective, from a caloric output, from, their algorithmic recovery calculation, they were all statistically different. These were two completely different populations we were looking at. So we felt valid in scaling our study to look at the entire fire department, or as many people as we could get these biometrics for. So we were very, very sure that these were two different populations, the lay population of people who were once athletes and still semi-athletes, but also look at spreadsheets and write emails. And then, our people on the engines, two different groups of people. So we felt good about scaling.
So what about the metrics that were showing that it was detrimental working the workload and the work week that they were working?
So we, what was cool is our system architecture took our staffing platform. So we use vector staffing. On the other end, we also used our HR data set. So we could see who was on what apparatus at any given point. Again, at the aggregate level. So it would be really hard to drill in. The way we set up our system privacy was such that, you couldn't just pull up and be like, oh, I wonder what this guy's doing today. It was more at an aggregate level of what is the experience of a firefighter on Medic 7 today? Or not even today, but, across the study period. So we were able to get so granular because we were able to have all these different systems talk to each other. So we brought in the RMS side, the staffing side. We brought in the biometrics, and then we also we used Joel's emergency services sleep diary to start to add a layer of qualitative data to understand what are people's perception of fatigue, what is their perception of how hard they worked the day before, what's their perception of stress and anxiety, and then how does it tie into their biometrics, what is their heart rate variability doing the day after, and then also what was their call experience. And then we also had longitudinal data across their shift to see, man, these guys are really busy at night. How did that impact their perception of stress the next morning versus these people were evenly spread out throughout the night and maybe ran the same number of calls, but just spread out over longer. What is their perception? So we added in that qualitative layer that I think also makes our data set translatable across some of the other research that's happening. But we were able also to slice and dice our set based on the apparatus you were assigned to. We know people on the ambulances are just getting their asses punched every single night. People on the engine, a little bit better. People on our truck companies, some of them were sleeping as good at home as they do at work. But also when they're awake at night, they're awake for a lot longer. And their skill set is, it needs to be excellent every time they're doing what they specialize in. And one other interesting thing is we also looked at tenure. So how long you've been doing the job as well as your age. And what kind of was interesting in our data set, we actually learned that some of the slower stations who have more senior people experience issues with their sleep as well. And is that, that's just asks more questions. Is it a problem with the station design? Is it the way that their station's laid out? Is it because they've had 20 years of having shitty sleep because of what they did when they were assigned to busy stations? But that was one thing that really surprised us when we actually started looking at our information, is how there's across the board, we have people with sleep issues. It just depends on how long you've been doing the job and where you started to accumulate or snowball those issues. You're not spared by going to a slow station if you've done it for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about the conversation of solutions. You've
Mm-hmm.
got, and you've alluded to, we haven't discussed the impact of your department specifically, but assuming you mirror pretty much everyone else in the US, and now you've got, less recruitment, more openings, overtimes, etc. What was the data showing, and then what have been some of the proposed solutions to turn this thing around?
Well, one thing that was super interesting was when we looked at across time or across a 6-day cycle. So the 2 days before, or the days before you go to work, and then the days you're at work. Our system, we do a shift change at 7 a.m. Our system is artificially taking sleep from people. The 2 worst days of sleep are the day we wake you up early to come to work and the day we wake you up early to wash the fire truck to go home. We are taking about an hour a day, an hour of sleep away from everybody on those 2 days. And specifically, we know that late morning sleep is some of the most important sleep from memory consolidation, from cognitive decision making. Those REM cycles that you get in the late morning are the most important ones for a lot of the things that we need to be really good at doing your job. I mean, I don't know how many times we got that call at like 4:45 on the second morning, and you roll out to get on the ambulance and you have no idea what the hell you're supposed to be doing. And you're like, I am fried. That's the window when you need the most sleep. So we found that, potentially moving back the shift start time to align more with people's biological wake up time. I can't throw a graph up here, but I have a really cool chart that from when we processed everybody's data. People in our group wanted their bodies wanted them to be asleep right around between 10 and 10:45 every night. It didn't matter whether you're at work or whether you're at home. Most people went to sleep between 10:30 and 10:45 every night. People woke up naturally on their days off around 6:45 was people's biological wake up time. When those 2 days that I talked about, we're waking people up at 5:30 in the morning to come to work, and we're waking people up at about 5:45 is when people wake up the morning before they go home. So if we were able to move our start time to one that aligned more biologically with what our population needed, I see us giving a fair bit of sleep back to people in that regard as well. Yeah. That's what I got for that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is obviously one part. The number of hours we'll definitely get to, but with the shift change conversation, I don't know why, but every department I know of that has changed the start time has literally taken the AM off the number and put the PM on. And there's another 23 hours in the day that you can choose from. So when I reflect to all the places I worked, and I would assume that your area is yet another one where not everyone can afford to live 10 minutes from the station. So when I think of my commute, if I was still in now, the 11 a.m., 12 noon time, to me, I think is the perfect one. Because on the 24/48, I only spent 1 out of 3 mornings with my family, pretty much my whole career. So if you extrapolate out. So by simply moving that to 11 or 12, exactly like you said, off-going shift, got their asses handed to them. And now, they sleep in till whenever, 10, and then they start, washing the rig, making coffee, all that stuff. Now they've caught up on 2-3 hours that they wouldn't have had. Conversely, the person who's ongoing gets up, has breakfast with their family, takes the kids to school, kisses their wife or husband goodbye. Then they head to work. And it's the same exact thing. You get in, you check out, but instead of breakfast, now it's lunch. So to me, that is such a fantastic solution for $0. So that's the first part. But obviously the other part is why, as I've said many, many times, is the person who wakes up from a dead sleep at 3 a.m, slides down a 2-story pole, gets in the back of a tiller, navigates to a structure fire, throws a ladder, makes entry through a 2nd-story window, pulls out a child, doffs their gear, and starts working a pediatric cardiac algorithm, is okay working 56 hours a week, but the guy at Starbucks who makes a delicious latte taps out at 40. So this is, the number one conversation, even though the start time, I think, can go hand in hand, is why the hell for so many years have we been working our firefighters these kind of hours? Because people say, oh, we used to do fire. Yeah, but that was decades ago. When I was young, we were getting murdered, and that was 2004 when I started, murdered every single shift. So this has been going on for a long time. So what is the conversation about getting away from the worst shift, i.e. the 4896, and then getting down to a 42-hour work week?
Oof. I guess that's why you've got a show. One thing that I at least wanted to say before we go down this part was with the later start time. One thing that I think, as the person who has to do callbacks now, we were previously calling people back at between 5:30 and 6 in the morning. It will ruin your day if you set your alarm to see if you got overtime and then not get it. If we were able to start later, so like you said, you could get kids out the door, you could get people off to work, then you could decide if you can work that overtime or that extra day or work that trade. It is so much easier from a staffing perspective if people can get their families handled before they have to make that decision of whether or not they've got the bandwidth to work an extra bit for the day. So that just is another feather in the cap of what you were talking about. As far as the total work hour thing, totally. I think the research is going there. I think we are working in that direction. We have to, in my mind, we have to make the roadmap to get there. And there are so many different things into me. Like if I could just flip a switch and we do it, luckily no one asks me. I can say all the stuff I want, but it doesn't matter. I think that there are things, there are both speed bumps and opportunities along the way that have to line up timing wise. And I think specifically, can I just go down? I wrote some notes down because I think this is where we go. This is where we go. I think and I think about each one of these from a domain perspective of how we're going to get there. It's not an if, it's when. We just need these things to line up. From an administrative perspective, we need the contract set correctly. We need to have a fire chief in place that sees the value of these things, can advocate for the value of these things to either a city, to a town, or to a board of directors. That needs to happen at the same time that we have kind of the available bandwidth to handle a transition like this. It's not hard. It's just a reprioritization of what the fire department's going to focus on. And that's absolutely, in my opinion, that should be the top of the pile, is figuring out how to make this job sustainable, not now, yes, but also 5 years from now when the new people who haven't been messed up are now doing this job. And even 10 years from now, when the people who haven't even considered doing this job are wanting to get into this profession. My goal is 10 years from now, people look back and say, oh my God, I can't believe those idiots did that. You know what I mean? I think that's 100%. Again, so from an administrative perspective, we need the correct time to make it happen. That's an opportunity. That's not a speed bump. It's just, how do we line it up? From a legislative perspective, I think we also need to see the broader public invest in public safety. And specific to that, the Denver metro area has been bonkers with the cost of living, with the increase in housing prices. So much so that fire departments have been flush around here. We haven't had a problem with making sure that our firefighters stay on pace with the increase in cost of living. Till now, we had our governor called a special session, which then readjusted all the property taxes. We had no control. We had no say in it. And now all of a sudden we're facing down the barrel of a pretty significant funding challenge. So much so that our state had funded a firefighter wellness trust where you could get, I think it was like $5,000 of services a year paid for by the state. Now, after 3 years, they're pulling funding for it. So now we have all these systems set up and now it's gone. We have a behavioral therapist that Emily, who we hired, who's amazing. And she is just squeezing these onions like crazy to make sure we have these strategies. So, and then we look at like Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. All of these ALS transport fire departments are looking, at a 7% reduction in reimbursement for some of this stuff. Again, none of this is unattainable. It's just a question of how do we roadmap a transition to doing this. I think the biggest power that we have collectively is the collective bargaining process. And I think, our internal conversations of like, how can we do this? Like, we have to put the power in the people. We need to believe in the people. We need to believe in the contract process. At least in our contract process, you get to pick 3 things to bring to negotiations. And like you were saying before, for years, it's been healthcare, salaries, and vacation. And that's all people have room for. So we need to then transition into a cultural education campaign of like moving people from I need money, healthcare, and time off, which arguably are the most important things that we go to jobs for. And how do we say we want to create a system that's kinder to families? You get to be home more, and we're going to prioritize this versus that. I'm all for it. We just have the biggest lift in my world is, or in my perspective, is the cultural change. Especially, man, we've increased our vacation the last couple contracts, and we've also lockstep increased how much you can get paid back for. So on one side, I can't have people being like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm tired too, but I'm the first idiot that's going to try and sell back as much vacation as I can because we got stuff to pay for here. So I think like there are things that we have to overcome as a culture that will allow us to get to where we need to be. And I also think like, man, the Denver metro market, and I know this isn't the experience everywhere, but you can't go to a Starbucks around here with some ding dong who's making $250,000 a year in a Patagonia vest who works at tech or finance or, this, that, or the other thing that are squeezing blue collar firefighters out of the housing market. Like we've got our newer guys, we have somebody who moved back in with their parents. They're making 6 figures a year and they moved back in with their parents because they're like, I'm never going to buy a house. Or we've got, a group of people who came out of the academy and they bought a house that's an hour away from where we work. And they all live there together because they can't afford a house in our own district. So like, that's the balance of like, I looked it up earlier. It's like a family of 4 in the Denver metro area needs to make $276,000 a year to live comfortably. And we just as a profession and with the tech sector and the finance sector in the Denver metro area, it's so hard to keep up with that. And then you add in the cultural part, the financial literacy part of new people who get this job. Like when I think when I left the private ambulance, I was making like $6.70 an hour. And I got this job and I'm like, oh my God, I'm rich. I don't have to drink Keystone Light anymore. You know what I mean? So I think like we also have to be the idea of like we need to stay up with the job market. We need to remain competitive. We need to find system fixes to get to that end goal. Again, none of it's impossible. It's a question of educating and having people prioritize these strategies over the other things that we're asking people to do every day. And the other things that they run into every day, like healthcare is double-digit increases across the board. And, you worry about high deductible plans and these HSA plans and things like that are the ways that, school districts, fire departments, police departments help shed some of the budgetary constraints is by cost shifting healthcare more on the employee. Well, turns out when we run, when you're tired and you're sick and you have metabolic disorder because of the shifts that you work, you're going to use healthcare a lot more. So I don't know. That was and I also think like from a regional balance, like as we make this transition, it needs to be a region. It needs to be a metroplex. When I look at, what you guys are doing down in Florida with the legislative prioritization of the 42-hour week, like it would be awesome to have every state come in and drop the hammer and say, this is our goal. This is what we want to do. You figure out how to make it happen. In the regional job market in the Denver metro area, we need somebody, we can't have somebody just make the first move. We need to do it all together because we have regional academies, we have regional special team responses. Again, these are all opportunities. These aren't roadblocks. These are things that we need to get people in the same rooms together. We need labor leaders. We need executive teams. We need everybody to come together and say, look, we know what we're doing to people. We know that this is not ideal. How can we all work together to get our entire metro area across the finish line? And that, that involves egos. It involves different motives. It involves political things. Like, you take a proposition like this to the firehouse, half the people are like, yes, this is the best thing ever. I'll do this job for the rest of my life. It's a wedge issue because people aren't educated. And that I think is, this is what you're doing through your podcast It's what I'm trying to do with my research and what we're doing at the broader level between, what Sarah's doing and what Joel's doing and what the guys down at Palm Beach County are doing. Like, all of these things are trying to push the conversation, to push the narrative to a culture change, and not something that we're just going to say, oh, that would be cool, but then never do anything about. So that's where I see the roadmap going to this kind of this end goal. I have no idea what I was just talking about. Did any of that make sense?
No, it did.
Will you just re-record that whole section?
No, it's funny though, because, people look at the legislature that just went through, and that was, amazing. Danny Alvarez was on here. Obviously, Governor DeSantis just signed it, but that didn't come first. By that point, 11 fire departments had already said, we're going to make this happen. And I think this is an important thing that people have got to understand. Like, I was lateral to, it wasn't technically lateral, but they took my Florida cert when I was an Anaheim firefighter. And then after the '08 crash, I'd actually moved back to Florida. They changed it, and you weren't allowed to have an out of state cert anymore. And so these departments can literally do whatever they want to do. So anyone who's waiting for a big organization to fix their things, you're going to be waiting a long time. And I've said this before, and I now stand by it. Perfect example. We have the IAFF leadership that live, that are out of Boston, and they enjoy a 24/72 schedule. And yet I have not seen one thing coming out saying this needs to be a national initiative. And it might be in the rumblings now, but I'm talking about for the last 9 years. And again, it was Fairfax before that. When it was Fairfax still works 56 hours a week. I'm pretty sure the work week is supposed to be one of the top things when you are in a union. So waiting, for example, for the organization that I paid dues for 14 years, and certainly didn't experience any incredible pay increases. So, was waiting at least, okay, what are the benefits, this is what I see. So it really is down to the organization to say enough is enough. That's what happened in Pasco County. That's what happened in Gainesville. That's what happened in Boynton Beach. And they end up becoming the thought leaders that then gave more courage to, the first followers, as they say.
Totally.
Where the real selling point is, and again, educate me if you guys are just, nowhere near this, but I wish it was, our people are being worked into the ground. We're losing people to cancer. We're losing people to suicide. Divorces are through the roof. We've got estranged children, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the case. Because if it was, we wouldn't even have this conversation. I wouldn't have a podcast because all firefighters would be healthy.
We did it. We fixed it.
So where you have to go is the money, sadly. And what these departments in Florida were able to show is like, we 10, 15, 20 years ago had all these recruits. Now we only have this amount of people testing. That has created all these holes in our staffing that is now being filled by forcing our 56-hour-a-week employees to work an 80-hour week. So, lo and behold, it's not working. And then it's costing you time and a half to fill what should be a straight time position. Now you've also got people that we're spending millions to train collectively, who are then walking out the back door in 2, 3, 4 years to go work for someone else after we trained them. Another massive loss. And you've got workman's comp claims through the roof, because as you alluded to, overworked workforce gets sick and gets hurt far higher. That creates medical disabilities, line of duty death payments, lawsuits from mistakes that tired firefighters make. By this point, in a city of your size, we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that are downstream. Taxpayers' money that has already been wasted and has created a deficit in the ability to serve your community. So I think it's that storytelling, and everyone's different and everyone's got their own numbers. But if you can show that by fully staffing a 4-platoon system, the overtime will go away. It will. Pasco, I just had Dixon Phillips on. They have no overtime at the moment. And I know the overtime whores are screaming out and wringing their hands.
How could you do this to us?
There are other ways of making money, and it's healthier to do it in a daytime job where you're an entrepreneur and you're a landscaper, personal trainer, mechanic, whatever it is that you do on the side. That is something to be encouraged. But doing more shifts, more nights without sleep, more exposure to trauma and organizational stress, that is the worst model. So when you hear these Florida departments and the successes that they're having, it does make sense. So unless you are a department that has no overtime, is fully staffed, as you alluded to, runs maybe one call a shift, which again, that's what Joel's study was, demonstrating. The department he studied ran one a shift, less than one at night. So, you can say, oh, the 4896 is slightly healthier, but that's not the real fire service. And also those firefighters are still kept from their families for 56 hours at a time. So it doesn't solve that problem. But for the other 99.9% of the American fire service, to use Desmond Tutu's quote, we spend so much time pulling bodies out of the river, we forget to go upstream to find out why they're falling in the first place. We have done nothing but watch wasted money drift past us rather than going, stop, we're going to invest in another shift. We're going to fix this problem, which in turn is going to save the taxpayers a lot of money, which in turn will then be the very raises that we've been told we can't have, and maybe will put us up to where we can afford to live in this area.
Yes. I guess that was easy. Yes.
It's a principles, it's not, the doing isn't easy, but understanding that you can do it, that's the first step.
Well, and one thing that we've done, it's not creatively, it's just good business, is that we're authorized by our board to hire 130% of what our shift costs are. So we have, I have not yet this year had to mando anybody back as a shift staffer. Not that it hasn't happened. It's just our system is set up that we carry extra weight to account for those things. And part of it is because we're the USAR sponsor. Part of it is because we have people on our wildland teams that are out all summer. So we run heavy for exactly that reason. Again, that doesn't fix any of the operational stuff that you were just talking about. We just don't seem to shift that burden on anybody who isn't wanting to do it. The extra work, the concern, like you alluded to, is like, man, this is not the healthiest extra work you can be doing with your time off. And then how do we get back into that education or changing the culture of, I hate to say it, but a lot of times, man, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to this stuff. Like whether it's selling back every second of vacation we can, or it's, the guys who end up making us lose our discount at the barbecue place because they're wearing their Class Bs and they're on their days off and stuff like that. If there's a way to take advantage of a system, we are the guys who will find it. So I completely agree with what you're saying. I think there are steps, like I'm saying, by like carrying extra overage within what your board or your city allows you to do, increasing those to the point that then that shift to that fourth platoon, like we're already staffed for it. You know what I mean? Now it's a question of the contract part of having the union come through and say, all right, this is what we're going to make our priority. 100%. I'm trying to think, how do we make these steps that eventually get us to the point that the switch to doing something else is already taken care of? And you're saying the exact same thing. And you have tremendous examples of people who are doing it already. And I think that's the coolest part, is that, you get a collective of these departments that can do it. It shifts the job market. It makes those departments more desirable. Then all of the reasons that you talked about, now we're able to get the overtime down. So now we're able to increase base wages. And now your payouts are better. Your muster out payments are better. And I know when we talked about it before, we're also talking about how pension systems work and how the pension part of the experience, how we need to be bringing people into this job to be able to carry the overhead of pension distributions, and how important this is as we move into our 5 and 10 year plans. How are we creating the pipeline of people who are going to be doing this job to support the pensions of the people who are headed out? And I think that's another super valuable argument when we talk about exactly what you do every week when you do your show.
Yeah, well, I think, and just to dovetail on the pension conversation as well, I mean, we've got a profession at the moment that, does 25 years of 56 hours a week, 80 hours with overtime. And then you have the drop program. So right when they get there, now they're like, I'm going to stay a few more years so I can double dip. And there's not an understanding that on average, we die 5-6 years after retirement. So working yourself into the ground and working against all the proactive wellness initiatives for in lieu of more money, more overtime, and then you die. That's a really shit plan. I hate to tell you, because
Well,
you
and
just
with the
gifted
pension, then your family doesn't get anything
no,
because
exactly.
you're gone. It's
You
not
just
a,
gave
yeah.
the city the biggest present they could ever have. And it's the same with buying out, vacation. I'm all for, paid leave needing to be used, because no one wins when you cash it out. Usually you don't get, actually what it's worth. And what you really need is that day off. I don't care if you watch Tiger King for 8 hours. It doesn't matter. Just, stay at home and get some sleep. So I think this is the beautiful thing on the other side of this conversation is that dark side, that abuse, that focusing on just benefits and money and pay raises and, all this kind of stuff that isn't, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, the kindness, compassion, empathy that's supposed to be at the core of what we do, is starting to dismantle some of that. So I'm not, having great benefits and pensions and everything, but for example, if something's working against our wellness and longevity, that needs to be addressed. And I'll give you the perfect example. If we fight for a work week that allows us to really perform at a high level, the next conversation is a punitive fitness standard. Because if you want to make sure that your firefighters die earlier, oppose fitness standards. It's that simple. No one's asking you to be, a world champion decathlon, but the things that you had to do in the academy, we want you to just be able to do them while you're wearing the uniform. It's a pretty small ask, in my opinion. But the moment we lower standards and we allow people to start gaining weight, we are literally saying, yeah, go get heart disease, go have a stroke. Yeah, that's awesome. We support what you're doing, rather than saying, not on our watch, because as long as we forge performance, the beautiful side effect is you're going to have a much healthier lifespan.
When I think I've got a perfect example of that is we have some of the most fantastic and dedicated guys who go out and teach at FDIC. They are amazing performers. They're the guys that if I were trapped in my house, I would want them to come get me. And they demand a lot of their people. And those are the guys, as an incident commander, those are the people that I want doing the high risk operations. Those are the people where I'm going to say, yep, you're the ones who I want doing this. You're getting the assignment. To that point, these guys had a save a couple years ago where they were masked up, ready to go. Air brake hit. They were inside. They went through terrible conditions. And these guys are the best in the business for being in shape and being amazing at their job. They went in and they got a little girl out of the room. We got the cyano kit started. The girl lived, and she is the perfect example why having high standards of ourselves and the department having high standards of our people is critical to us doing the job. And this ties back into what I'm talking about is, if we're able to cycle load management, if we're able to make it so people come to work and they are the best that they can be when they're given those opportunities. When you look at the people are so motivated for performance and training and being excellent at our jobs and investing in the craft and the tradesmanship of this job, you want those people to be dialed in, to be rested, to be ready to rock when it's time to hit the green light. So that goes exactly to your point. And you see this through every layer of the fire department. You want the people making every decision that you need that could be life or death, or it could be on a spreadsheet. You want those people, ready to rock. And so I completely agree with what you're saying. And it makes me sad if there are places that aren't like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two interesting things. Firstly, with the lowering of the recruitment bar, or even pool, if you like. I had a police officer on not too long ago who now works in background checks. He's got a company, and he was at a conference, and someone asked, or he asked the question, I think, to the speaker, is there a dollar amount attached to getting rid of the wrong employee, a poor employee that got hired that shouldn't have? And he said, on average, it's about $500,000. So right there, as we are, getting away from that 1,000 people for 13 spots, that increases. So there's a dollar amount there. That little, narcissistic leather helmet, mustachioed, chest-beating firefighter that I was referring to earlier, the one that's always on social media talking about Firefighter and anti-EMS. If you actually want to perform at the highest level, you need the rest and recovery. And I guarantee you, if you did get to see the metrics of that cycling team, sleep would be a huge part of their performance.
Very
metric.
much so. Yeah.
So every time I hear someone talking about, well, I remember my last part-time job, or any kind of wanky sleep when I'm dead rhetoric, it makes me want to punch them in the face, because what you're actually saying is, I actually don't want to be a very good firefighter. So don't give me the rest and recovery. Therefore, I have an excuse of being shit. Rather than saying, well, I take my fitness seriously. I go to the conferences. I do the extra training. And I also focus on my rest and recovery. And if you are opposing, in my rank now, if you're a firefighter, or, in the station, and you're opposing a healthier work week, not only are you saying I don't want to spend as much time with my family, which I really question your ethics and mental health at that point, but also you're saying I choose to be a worse firefighter. Because as you said, if you make entry into that room and it's 2 a.m. and you have a busy, exhausted mind, you are not going to be able to find that child. It's just that simple. It's neuroscience.
I agree. And I also think we should do more naps. I think every station should be required to turn on Step Brothers, and everybody goes and racks out in the recliner for an hour and a half every day. I think that, totally to your point, like, we want our people the best that they can be when it's time to do the grown-up stuff. And it's awesome. And it's fun to see the people who do prioritize that be amazing at what we do, and to try and support that passion. Yes, 100%.
So
Another easy one.
Yeah, 100%. So the three things that I think are real game changers is the 2472, the midday-ish start time. And then the third one, I had a couple of guests from GMR, which is a parent company of AMR.
Mm-hmm.
They have a thing called nurse navigation. So it integrates in your 911 system. You get a call. The classic example is, new parents, 15-month-old child threw up once, and they think he's going to die of dehydration there and then. So
who hasn't been there, though?
Exactly.
Those first couple of weeks are crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a legitimate thing, you know what I mean? As a parent and as a responder, we've seen it, umpteen times. So now the dispatcher goes through their algorithm, determines it's not a, Charlie Delta Echo, and then said, well, look, we got two options. We can send you some paramedics, or I can connect you right now with a ER nurse. Which one would you like? And they're usually like, well, yeah, I'll talk to the nurse. They just want help. They want guidance. So then they have this telecall, conference with this nurse. They do everything from treat at home, okay, are they warm? Take a temperature. Okay, let's remove the clothes and leave a diaper on. Have you got Tylenol, et cetera, et cetera. Through to they can schedule urgent care clinics. They can schedule Ubers and Lyfts to that appointment. If they need a telehealth, then they go to a physician. They obviously then can get prescriptions refilled, et cetera, et cetera. And even from the mental health side, non-emergent, there's a lot of those as well. So when you were talking about the workload, the third prong, I think, of really making a difference in the fire service is whatever version of that model integrate in, because this is what I love the way they framed it. They said EMS should be 3-tier. We told everyone to call 911, so we can't blame them for that.
Well, we teach them in preschool even.
Yeah, exactly. And even your dentist, your optician, whatever. If this is an emergency, we're closed, call 911. But the third is you got ALS, you got BLS, where we still go, and then you've got non-emergent. And I love that, because that probably is going to be a solid 20 or 30% of calls that the patient pays a fraction of the amount that they would if they broke the threshold in the ER. An ER bed stays open for a true emergency, and that crew never even got woken up for that call.
Yes. We've looked at that. We have county level EMS or county level dispatch. So that's still, we previewed it. We looked at it. Like Aurora Fire on the other side of the city have used it. And I think they saw like a 20-something% reduction in low acuity 911 calls that made it to the station. Imagine that. Like, that's huge. That's the stuff that never happens. I also think about like San Antonio Fire that has the app, like that'll send you a link, and they have a paramedic who works in dispatch, and that helps them also right size the response as well. Exactly what you were talking about. You're like, oh, thanks for calling 911. Here's a link. It opens up the FaceTime. There's a paramedic there who can say, oh, this is a real one. Let's get people rolling. From a risk mitigation standpoint, you're also not having people buzz across the city, lights and sirens, on something that they're just ill-informed as to what the nature of the call is. So there's like a lot of really cool stuff that's happening in the world for like from a risk reduction perspective at the community level. And like, so we have mobile integrated healthcare at West Metro, where we have nurse practitioners and a PA that work for the fire department that scalp those exact calls that you're talking about from a humanist perspective of we connect people with exactly what they need instead of the emergency room. And then also from a care navigation standpoint, which has been huge. Our internal numbers are showing once our nurse practitioner makes contact with a frequent 911 caller, their calls back reduced 78% over the next 60 days.
Wow.
So again, talk about those things as the call that never happens is the success. Our nurse practitioner will call somebody that we have ongoing, not issues, but have complex needs. They'll call them and say, "Hey, what's up? Did you get your pills refilled?" So we can be proactive in that point instead of reactive, which is the traditional 911 model. And that again comes from a care navigation standpoint of we have people who just lack the faculties to get signed up for Medicaid, and they lack the ability to navigate a very complex healthcare system. So if we can do that beforehand, again, to your exact point, the other thing that we have done that works really well is one of my buddies, our EMS captain, has started to work with the nursing homes with their supervisors and providing them their data back on how many times we go there, what the nature of the call is, and whether or not this person gets admitted, or how can we fix their problem at home, in the nursing homes. One thing that we've seen in the Denver metro area is private equity has come in and bought a bunch of the nursing homes and stripped them of their ability to provide in-home care, where they're saying, "Oh, you previously had mid-levels that did rounds. Now we're not going to do that." Like one prime example is one of the senior living places around the corner from the firehouse I used to be at got acquired by private equity. And then they went from having in-home or available care to now a call button that goes to a call center that then triages the person. And surprise, when someone triages the person over the phone, they're going to send the fire department every time. So we look at, policy level and system level fixes for those exact things that you're talking about. And they're so cool to see so many different entities trying to fix the problems before they happen. And I think, again, like that, as far as like the three different prongs you talked about, that's what's so cool about the opportunity to do this job, is that we have not just the responsibility to our people, but the responsibility to the people who call 911 to do better. One other like really cool thing that our city is doing is we actually have like remotely placed drones that the cops run, and they will self-dispatch on fire calls before we even get toned out, and they'll have eyes in the sky of whatever the incident is, and we can spool up or slow down our response based on the information that we're getting from the drone. The cool example of it was we had they were able to geo layer in the addresses, and they could actually we were going on a fire, and before our first engine even arrived, the drone was piping in notes into the CAD, or the drone operator, that said, "Hey, this is an electrical, a line down in the backyard. It got the fence on fire. Now the fence is getting into the roof." And we were able to know exactly where the hazard was. We knew that there were lines on the ground that hadn't tripped out the system. So we had live wires in the back of the house, and we were able to see that people were evacuating before our first engine even showed up. And that is just so cool. So like I said, I'm so excited about so many different things that are happening in our profession. And, just to have an extreme tangent from what our, main idea was today. But, I'm just very excited for the future about what we're doing.
I mean, that's a perfect example. I'll give you a parallel one. I had a gentleman on whose name just fell out of my head. I don't know why. Anyway, if you've ever seen the footage of the guy, he's got almost like an Iron Man suit, but the jets are on his arms, and he flies. And he started off, looking at kind of the military and even first responder space, and then really it ended up being more like a sport thing ultimately. Richard Browning, that's his name. And but what caught my eye is they did one for mountain rescue in the UK, and the medic basically flew up with a backpack to the patient, drops down, the bottom of the cliff, wherever they ended up falling, packages the patient, And then I was telling him, can they fly them down? Can they harness them? He's like, well, no, the FAA won't allow that. But what you can do, I don't know why this is different, but he said you can then attach the stretcher to a drone. I guess a person can't pilot another person, but a drone can.
Yeah.
And then the drone flies it down to the ambulance, and then they receive it, and then off they go. And obviously the medic will follow down. So I agree 100%. The innovation is there for technology. What we need to do, though, is apply that same innovation to the person inside the uniform. And that's, I think, what this conversation is. We look at technology, we look at drones in wildfire, in the example that you've given, and mountain rescue. We look at, whole blood and all these incredible things that are starting to take flight now. So the conversation is, but we still have to apply the same thing to our humans. And I want to get us from, let's try and get us to stop dying, to forging performance in the human being. And that involves fitness standards, rest and recovery, mental health practices, breath work, all these things that create these men and women that physically and mentally perform at an extremely high level, because, as I say so many times, lives depend on us.
Mm-hmm. And being proactive rather than reactive. I think that could also be one of the underlying themes of our whole time today.
100%. And
trying to get ahead of it.
We are reactive. I mean, that's the thing. If we're going to give any grace at all, the nature of our very profession is reactive. But understanding...
Well, it's our whole job.
Yeah, exactly. So understanding that we have to go into the proactive side to fix the things that are killing us too.
Yeah. When the red light turns on in the sky, you go and do stuff and you fix other people's problems.
Exactly. Well, I want to go to some closing questions, but one more area you just touched on, but I know we want to take a slightly deeper dive. Talk to me about the financial literacy that you're doing in the academy, and then that layer as well of our overall well-being as far as the finance side.
Well, and I think this goes back into if you can have somebody who's financially astute and making good choices and learning from the get-go. Like I said, man, I won the lottery when I got this job. I was so excited. It was the most money I'd ever made in my entire life. Like I volunteered in the psych department doing their experiments when I was in college for beer money. I worked at a Chili's. I had, the job at driving the wheelchair car. Like, this job was it for me. I was like, I've never made this much money in my life. I can do whatever I want. And, granted, in the scale of things, it's not amazing when you're brand new, but it was the most I'd ever made. And you are in a prime opportunity to make some really bad financial decisions when you first get hired. So what we do in our academy is we actually have part of it is financial literacy. It's a financial wellness. It's taught by two guys who actually started a podcast called The Fiscal Firehouse. They are brilliant dudes. Louis and Beatty. Louis used to run the state budget for Colorado Department of Transportation, and John Beatty. Both of those guys are on our e-board, and he went back and got his master's in personal finance. And his sole mission is to get people to not have $1,000 truck payments as soon as they graduate from academy. So they talk about, investing early, and how do you build personal budgets? How do you make good choices? How do you, start electing to defer some of your money into a 457 or a 401 or whatever you got? So they have taken it over the top. And it's like these dudes' mission to make sure that we're getting people out of this job in a place where they're not staying because they have to, they're staying because they want to. And so, they talk about like pension deferrals and like how you can decide when is the best time to take your pension. And so they try and target, people throughout the spectrum of their career. And they have different episodes that are tied to, this financial literacy from the beginning, to while you're making midlife decisions, to when you have kids. What the hell do you do financially when you have kids and you're being cut to pieces by $35 copays for ear infections? And then, then when you're later in your career, how are you saving for college? And then when you're on your way out, like I said, how are you doing it so you get to leave on your own terms? And I think that ties back into our broader conversation of people's financial wellness. Like, if they're working overtimes because they're house poor, or they're overextended on a car payment, or they've got this, that, or the other thing, and this is the most efficient way for their family to make enough money to live comfortably, then how are we educating people from the get-go so they're not putting themselves into that situation where they're having to compromise their health to do things that we know are bad for them to pay those bills. So I think when we look at pillars of overall wellness, I think financial literacy, financial wellness is as important as your health, because if you're not healthy enough to work, or like you said earlier, you're not healthy enough to live 5 years after you finish this job, why the hell are we even doing it? So I wanted to at least make sure like that I put that plug in there, because I think like for all my nerd stuff and all this information, that all this research that I'm doing, at the end of the day, like this is as important as anything else we talk about is the financial health of the people that do this job.
I saw that when I went to Anaheim. Hialeah, I don't remember if it was just because I wasn't there that long, but I bought a car when I came to the States. It was, I think, $2,700 I paid for a Nissan Sentra 97, stick shift. And that's what I had. I got to Anaheim, and the California money was a lot better than I just left. So same as you, when I got there, I was like, oh my God, I'm a millionaire.
Yeah.
But I was still, I literally landed in California. So under the flight path of Burbank Airport, and a little efficiency in the back of a house. So real, Hollywood story, if you like. So all my money was going into kind of getting established, saving, paying all the bills. But yeah, my friends had not only expensive trucks, but they had jet skis and dirt bikes and Winnebagos and fifth wheels, and they were, and then it was when they were doing
it's tough to frown on a jet ski.
Daniel Tosh. But yeah, and then it was the whatever they called it, the interest only mortgage, that everyone got in trouble with. But luckily, because I come from Florida, these California prices, I was just like, there's no way. I'm not going to spend, $700,000 on a 800 square foot house. You lost your mind. So because it was so jarring at that time, it stopped me. It wasn't like I had great financial sense. It was so jarring that I didn't. And years later, and sadly, a lot of those guys had lost all those things, had lost those homes. And I traded my Nissan Sentra in that was still working for 309,000 miles on the clock. And it was still going. And it was kind of that moment that I realized that it just gets you from A to B. And we are so sold, especially as men. If you want to be a man and you need a Ram and all this stuff, like, you don't. Yeah. You don't. So even, you've got obviously the boom and the refinancing and all the things, but then you've got television just telling you over and over again, you don't have enough. You aren't enough. But if you will be, if you have this watch and this truck, blah, blah, blah. And so, people just being aware of that, aware of the propaganda that's just keeping you in debt. If you can take a step back and realize the game, and realize that your, small car can actually tow a small trailer, for example. They do in Europe all the time, and that you don't need something that could tow a semi-trailer just to take your boat, or whatever the thing is. So debunking the capitalistic myths, I think, is another arm of this whole financial literacy that you can do with so much less than the television tells you can.
Well, and I think this also goes into a lot of the wellness strategies that we talk about. Like, my wife and I have a rule is like, we don't make any big financial decisions the first day after shift, because we know that your mind is not prepared to handle the complexity of the long-term decision or the long-term consequences of an issue. Like, you're not buying a house, you're not buying a car, you're not making a big call when you're in a cognitively vulnerable state. And I think when you think about how often we put ourselves, because in the way that my dumb mind thinks about what we do, it's like you're perpetually jet lagged, and you're perpetually, when you get off work, you're on a different time zone. And when you think about it that way, you're like, well, I'd never buy a car, or I'd never, make these big decisions in those cognitively vulnerable states. And I think that's also just part of the campaign, is helping people realize and be in tune with their own bodies to the point when they know, like, this is not the best time to buy, a brand new truck, or this is not the best time to, be considering a giant purchase. So yes, absolutely. Maybe I've done a lot of just agreeing with you. I'm sorry. I feel like we should. You want to pick something we don't agree on, and then we talk about that? No,
I think this is the thing. I think it's common sense. But yeah, I mean, when you're talking about making financial decisions, maybe it's not the right time to be driving $1 million ladder truck or pushing medications on a child either. You know what I mean? So it goes back
or
to that.
Yeah, or if you change shift at a time where we could be potentially releasing a bunch of young guys in their 20s and young guys and gals in their 20s with more money than sense, releasing them on society in the evening after being awake for 2 days is probably not the best time for people to be going out to the bars and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, the first of the closing questions, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our conversation today or
Ooh,
completely unrelated.
yeah, I'm a weirdo for books. My wife's an English teacher, so I get to celebrate all of the classics that I never read when I was in high school, and I just spark notes them or did the cliff notes. So I've been asked to get reinvigorated with some of the classics. I think if you haven't read, because you didn't in high school either, if you haven't read any Vonnegut, I would say some of his perspective on the world, especially our world, is fascinating. And specifically, Slaughterhouse-Five is a phenomenal book to go back into. Vonnegut was a POW in World War II. He was a prisoner of war in Dresden when it was firebombed. And his perspective and outlook on the world is fascinating. His mantra throughout that book is "so it goes." And it's not, you're not reactive to your situation. You just understand, or he understands, that the world moves on and you get to decide how you're going to engage with it, and so it goes. And I think that is from a first responder's perspective. When I read it through the lens of what we do every day, I think that that is a tremendously empowering thought. It's a tremendously empowering book. I think the calamity and the sadness that we see all the time, you have to find ways to process those things. There are good ways and there are bad ways, but at the end of the day, we have to experience those things. So I think some of the old Vonnegut is fantastic, applicable, it's funny, it hits a lot of the things that we do. I would say Vonnegut is a good one. I also found in my dabbling around the world with things is a lot of the old Stoic work. So Seneca, he was a Stoic back in the day. The way that he approaches ethics and the treatment of others and is fascinating. There's a version of the book that you can get that has it in Greek on one side, and then like those Shakespeare Made Easy books from high school. And then also has the English translation. And I find a lot of it, especially in like, you're in my perspective of like, how can we help people being really awesome? Like the way that he approaches from a Stoic's perspective, interaction with the world, interaction with people who are in different circumstances, and just an outlook on humanity at whole is a really interesting thing. So we can go back to those, but I also think there's one that we had to read about an astronaut. I wrote this one down. It was super cool. An astronaut's guide to life on Earth. And it was Colonel Chris Hadfield. And he was a Canadian test pilot who all he wanted to do was be an astronaut. And he talked about the trials and tribulations of getting to that point, the things you have to do, the questions of how do you put your family first in a system that does not want families to be first from a professional perspective. Was great. I really enjoyed that book. And then lastly, the second half of Jacinda Ardern's book, A Different Kind of Power, is phenomenal. It talks about being in positions where you need to create policy and think about how to empathetically lead people, and how she was the Prime Minister of New Zealand during COVID, and she was the Prime Minister during the terror shooting in Christchurch at the Muslim mosque. Like, she had to lead people through some pretty shitty situations, and she always showed up being kind and humble and a humanist first. So I think like that's a different way to perceive what our role as leaders in the fire service is to lead a different way, to not bark, but to lead with kindness and humanity first. So those are all like really cool books that I think are from all over the world, like all over the zone. Sorry, there was not a consistent theme through any
No,
of
there
those
didn't.
things.
Doesn't need to be. No, I mean they're all great suggestions. I know the Slaughterhouse Five has been suggested. I think only once before, so I've got to read that. Chris, is it Caulfield, the astronaut? Yeah, he's Hadfield. That's right.
Yeah.
Caulfield's a coach. Yeah, that's someone I want to get on the show. But yeah, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. What surprised me is that it looked like she was going to hold that kind of stance for the longest time, and at the end, she enforced all these mandates, and so I don't know. I'd be curious to climb into her mind, like why did she kind of lose that fitting at the end when actually a lot of the other nations were coming out of the COVID, pandemic and that stance. Really late in the game, she did a complete 180 and shut the country down. And I'm curious as to what the backstory was with that.
I would love to have dinner with her and just listen and learn and see how she thinks about her And the crazy part about her, she just was like a regular person. She was, somebody who grew up kind of in the rural part of New Zealand, and just through a passion and understanding of people, was able to move into a pretty influential spot. So I really enjoyed her biography for that reason, is because it shows in a democracy how people with just cool ideas and interesting perspectives can get a lot of people behind them.
In a real democracy where you don't pay to play.
Yep.
All right, before we go down that rabbit hole, what about
that's a different show.
Films and documentaries that you love?
Oh my God. Dude, I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. I haven't seen a real movie in years. We went to go see Bad Guys 2 in the movie theater yesterday. There were some ups and downs. Great plot. I think we got Disney Plus at the beginning of COVID, and I think we have celebrated nearly every film in there. So I don't know that I'm the best guy to talk about, because seeing is like, I referenced Wildcrats earlier in our conversation. If you haven't watched Wildcrats out there and you've got little kids, I think that's a good use of time. And enjoy Sesame Street as long as it still exists. I think those are two things that we should hope for. No, I don't think we've watched a grown-up movie, and I can't even remember the last time. We did watch Superbad as a crew once, and I was very uncomfortable. When you're when you're 20 and you watch Superbad for the first time, you're like, this is great. But then when everybody's looking at you as the battalion chief, you're like, I need to find my way out of this room real quick. I do think, though, that's another part that I think is like the cultural competency of the movies, the Firehouse films. And I know when you had the Super Trooper guys, like, you think about how important those films were to young firefighters growing up in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. Like, that was the bottom of our pyramid. And you think about, you rattle off some of those quotes in the Firehouse nowadays, and there are people who have never seen those movies. And there's a generation gap and a translation gap on a lot of the movies that, you almost need to, before you can start in a Firehouse, you need to watch some of those films so that you're up to speed before you come in and somebody rips one on you and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? But
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, also some of these younger kids grew up with, the very woke movement in Hollywood too, where everything was suddenly offensive. And I remember Robert Downey Jr. was on Joe Rogan's show, and they were talking about how they couldn't make Tropic Thunder these days. And I just remember that it's, I think it's coming out of that now too. But what a ridiculous statement that you can't parody the racism of Hollywood in a film because it will offend people that think it's racist. I mean, that says it all,
Yeah, you have one person rattle off a couple Rush Hour 2 quotes, and you've got yourself a real big problem.
Exactly.
Also a great film. Celebrate the entire collection.
You can't even open your mouth.
Chris Tucker's early work. Yeah.
South Park, which again, I'd love to get those guys on the show one day. First, you need to find out how everyone else got canceled, but you didn't. That's a superpower in itself.
Exactly.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Well, I think our financial guys are awesome. Like, the work that they do is so funny. They could keep it so lighthearted. They're like the most serious, unserious people that you could put I think those guys are great. I also think like a really fascinating person to talk to would be Kate Capallo. She was with DC Fire and EMS for a while, and her PhD is in human factors. Which, even though she said it a bunch of times, I still could not be sure of what that actually means. I think what it is system designs that take into account human decision making. And like every time I've heard her talk, I'm just like blown away with how smart she is and the things that, she's experienced in her career, good and bad, and also, how she has integrated into the fire service as a researcher outside of our world. I think she'd be fascinating to talk to.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that's come up recently when I've realized the danger of putting out a study that is supposed to be looking at firefighter health, but is not culturally competent,
For
how
sure.
detrimental that can be. And it's not, again, criticizing our researchers because they're researchers, but when there's that disconnect, and Joel's study is a perfect example, and then the country runs with, 4896 is better. Wasn't Joel's fault. Joel just did a study on a quiet department. But when, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, it can be super detrimental. So getting researchers that have been in our position, or, like Sarah, obviously she was raised in a firefighter family. But even then, like she admitted in a recent podcast, when I talked about sleep deprivation with her a few years ago, she was like, that's stupid. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And then all of a sudden she takes a deep dive and like, oh my God, this is everything that we've been talking about. So that's an interesting, topic that's really surfaced recently, is if you are going to research, in this case, the fire service, you really need to be doing the ride-alongs and, all this kind of thing, just like our clinicians are, the mental health side, because otherwise you just don't understand what you're researching. And then therefore you can create data that actually sends us in the wrong direction.
Well, but the great thing about both of them is that they are so involved in the community now, and they have been for a long time, that they are becoming the experts. They're becoming us. And I think that's what's fantastic about the research that NDRI is doing moving forward, is that they have SMEs built into the process that can put the stepbrothers filter on things, because the translation, and we saw it during COVID, we saw it where we are now, is that we have these great academic resources. We need someone who exists in the middle to translate this information in both directions. We need some dickhead who knows all the Super Trooper quotes to filter them going up, and then also translate the science coming down and offer that perspective of how do you operationalize some of this stuff. And that's, I think, where we create the cultural education campaign to move the needle with exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think also, what's a study in the first place? Because if you think about a grant that's like, is 2448, healthier than a 4896, that doesn't even need to be looked at. What needs to be looked at is the entire Northeast is working 24/72. So let's compare that to the 56-hour work week. Now you have a mind-blowing study that would have revealed all the things that we talked about several years ago. So that's my thing, is, all that grant money and all that time, they could have done exactly the same thing with, two very, very different shift schedules and had some incredible data. So guiding these researchers into what the real issue is, and where we can send them, so their minds will be blown then when they get the data between those two.
Well, and I also think funding federal level research, as well as FEMA, SAFER grants, AFG grants, those are the things that also are the bedrock of funding fire service things. Like when you talk about writing SAFER grants for 4 spots on engines, or writing SAFER grants to be able to upstaff ambulances, when you divide a finite amount of calls by more people, you also reduce the workload there. So I think all of these avenues are critical for exactly what you're talking about. But if we lose our big funding sources at the federal level, the downstream impact will be terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's going to put all that pressure on those line crews, on the ambulances.
Absolutely. In a profession
That was
that's
a bummer.
already
We can't end like
woefully...
that.
No, we're not gonna.
Okay, good.
So the last question before we make sure we know where to find you, and then if people are able to see, your studies, what do you do to decompress?
Ooh, we got a Peloton during COVID, and that thing, we have put some work on that bad boy. I also think that, like I said, giving back where you can. I fill my cup volunteering in a kindergarten, which again presents new boogers and new viruses every week. And then I volunteer for when you have a kid on swim team, you don't get volunteer, you voluntold. But I try and work the pancake station every time that I can. I think it's so cool to see little kids grow and come into a sport and see their friends and their little packs of snot nose, little weenies, that things that they come up with is so cool. It is so cool to see kids develop their own little social packs and things like that. That just makes me so happy. I also really like talking about this stuff. And by the length of our conversation today, I'm sorry, but I love this stuff. I like, I presented at Science to the Station when this thing was just starting up, when our research was starting. Out at the NFA, I've talked about it. One thing I really love is I've got what I call a research assistant. One of the friends from work, his daughter is in a STEM program, and she's working as my data science research assistant for part of her senior year. And we're actually building Google Map API models to forecast drive times for everybody who works at the fire department based on different start times. So that's her project. So mentoring. I love trying to create a passion for this job in my own weird way. And it's not, in the traditional way, but I see and I hope that it adds value to what we do to, help, like I said, have people help weird people and goofy people find their place in this job. And that's what I love to do.
Beautiful. Well, for people listening, where are the best places to find you, online or social media?
Social media. I'm a creeper on Instagram. I don't post anything on there. I don't think I've used Facebook since it wasn't cool anymore.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. I have a LinkedIn. Our director of public health for the county said I need to have a LinkedIn. So I have a LinkedIn, which is kind of fun. But I think you can get me at my department email. Like I said, I'll talk you in circles about this stuff all day if you catch me. So my department email, mbinney@westmetrofire.org. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. And if there's anything that I can do with biometric implementation or starting these processes, I also think data privacy. A lot of my training has also been in making sure if we're collecting this information, how are we keeping it safe so that it can't be used against people, but also be used with the noblest of intentions. So that's something that I've kind of specialized in over the last couple of years. So again, like if you're thinking about starting a biometric program, reach out, because I've screwed a lot of things up along the way. And if I can save some people some lost sleep, I guess that, that helps in a couple different ways.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mike. It's been such an interesting conversation. I mean, your journey in the fire service, the kind of unique path that you took when it came to, the wellness approach, especially with the tech. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.